Greetings everyone. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the greatest movies of all time, a movie that you all should see immediately. Essentially, the other week I was sat there watching a movie kind of like Battle Royale but with suicidal teens, and when it finished, Tubi, the service I was watching it on, popped up with a little message. It said, "Up next, Psycho Gothic Lolita." And of course my response is, what is that? Tell me more about that. Tell me about that right now. I need to know more about that. What is it? And so of course, I had no choice but to watch it. And now I'm going to tell all of you about it and why you should do exactly what I did. So buckle in folks and get ready. So first we'll start off with essentially the only mediocre part of this film, and that is the story. It's not bad, but it's nothing really to write home about. But that also really isn't why you watch a movie like this. And it's also why I didn't put a spoiler warning in this one, because it kind of comes up front with what it's about, and then it is just essentially a boss rush. The story is that this girl's mother was killed and her dad was paralyzed by about 6 people, and she's going to go and get revenge. And so then we get essentially a montage of her getting revenge against 6 individual boss characters, some of which are very exciting. And that's really all there is to it. There's nothing more past that. But sometimes a movie like this kind of splatterhouse action film, a simple tale of vengeance can be really effective at moving the plot forward. So while I don't think the story is deep, or theoretical, or philosophical, it really works to kind of move you to the next plot point where we get to see the next exciting and brilliant sequence. And sometimes, that's really all you can ask for. It's effective, it's simple, it's alright. And now we've got the story out of the way, let's start talking about the things that matter. So in an effort to save what this movie does best for last, I'm going to talk about the production design and the set design first. While a lot of the sets are essentially just empty warehouses or empty gyms, they fill these areas with these whimsical characters. The opening sequence takes place in this kind of gambling hall that is very clearly just an abandoned warehouse. But they have all of these unique gambling games, these individual characters who are dressed really eccentrically or act really eccentrically, and there's tons of like fun little details in there that are a treat for the eyes. And they kind of keep this stylistic thing going in the way they kind of frame the characters and the way they kind of shoot the characters. Some of the boss characters have really interesting designs, and I'll get to some of them a bit later, but I'll just mention for the first part that the kamikaze crew, who are kind of like this group of cheerleaders, have this eccentric personality and this style and this design about them. But where this is most present is in the main lead, our Psycho Gothic Lolita herself. Not only is her outfit cool as shit, and I obviously can't commentate on how accurate it is as far as Lolita style or Gothic style is concerned in Japan, because I'm not really an expert, but it looks real cool. But even more so than that, she has these elaborate umbrellas that she has about 5 of them, I believe, and they all have different designs and different shades to them. That just adds so much style and uniqueness to this movie. While this is ultimately a pretty low budget affair, you can tell that from the locations, you can tell that sometimes a little bit from the camera quality. They've managed to create this really stylistic, really visually pleasing set of characters and design choices. Sometimes it feels a little bit like it's out of a video game or perhaps out of an anime, even though it's not based on anything at all. In fact, there's a whole sequence in which our main character fights a boss character called L. And while I'll speak more about L later, I would like to briefly mention her style. So I'm probably saying this wrong, but she represents a Japanese fashion subculture called gyaru. And this is kind of this gaudy, super tanned, stylistic schoolgirl approach. So then when she finds herself stood across from our main character, our Gothic Lolita, there's this fabulous contrast and this fabulous comparison between these two really opposing styles that really bleeds into the kind of super stylized approach that this movie is trying to take. And as I was saying about the video game stuff, the umbrella that our main character uses in this scene and the guns that Elle uses in this scene feel straight out of Capcom. I think this is a large reason why this movie works, and if you're willing to let that vibe sink into you, I think you can really take something cool from this movie. And since we're talking about production design, I would be remiss to not talk about the practical effects in this movie. The practical effects were the work of a guy named Yoshihiro Nishimura, and I have heard this guy referred to as the Tom Savini of Japan. This movie is filled with dramatic blood spurts and brilliant gore effects that really amp up the excitable style of this movie. And I'm not going to show too much of it just so that you don't get a lot of it spoiled, because it's very cool to look at. And realistically, the only thing I spoil with this movie, since the story isn't much, is these kind of practical effects and the action scenes that come across. In a similar effort, I've also decided not to talk as much about kind of the individual boss characters. I mentioned Elle briefly, of course, but there are a couple that will really surprise you. There's this one guy called Yuri Gera, and he kind of has to be seen to be believed, the things that he does in this movie. I'll let you be the judge of kind of what that name is implying based on the real life guy that name parodies. And so with that in mind, let's move on from the set design and the character design and the production design and move on to arguably the most important part of this movie. A lot of the reviews that I've read going into this movie talk about this particular perception of the film, that this was a Splatterhouse film that was maybe a bit light on effects. And while I haven't really seen enough Splatterhouse movies to really say so, there's some real good ones in there. The reason for this seems to be because they took an extra focus on making sure that the action was cool in this movie. And really, there's no reason for a movie like this to have action at the level that it has. It's filled with excitingly choreographed fight scenes, these martial arts, I'm not going to say hand to hand, but umbrella to sword fight scenes, and even some dramatic gun shootouts that, well, they're not really in the line of John Woo, but they're exciting and they're fun anyway. You're getting this choreography that's full of style too, matching the earlier production design where there's a lot of pauses, there's a lot of stances that really accentuate kind of the elaborate and over-exaggerate style that this movie is going for. If you're a fan of action like me, you won't be disappointed going into this one, because you're going to see some really cool fight scenes with some really exaggerated death scenes that are just so much fun. Now, this movie was choreographed by a pretty famous name, actually. Or rather, should I say, he should be more of a famous name, but it's a pretty well-known name in the stunt industry. This movie was choreographed by a guy called James Mack, sometimes referred to as Jimmy Mack. He's directed a few movies by himself as well, some to moderate success with a crew that he trusts, but it's more likely that a lot of you know him because of his work choreographing the Scott Pilgrim movie. In fact, he even features a brief cameo at the start of the movie. I was so impressed and enjoyed the choreography and the stunts in this movie so much that I quite literally looked up this guy and was excited to see more of what he'd done. I'm excited to check out this guy's movies that he's directed to see the kind of stunts that he's put in there. I also hope you won't be disappointed by the fight scenes in this movie. They're not particularly realistic, but they're trying to go for a really stylized approach. With these wide shots and these long takes, you get really clear and concise action with good choreography. While it might not blow you away, it's a lot of fun, and it certainly adds this extra spice to this movie and makes it really exciting. Especially with some of the really inventive boss fights that come up later on, and the way they kind of adapt the choreography to suit them. And while I'm not going to spoil these fight scenes, I'm sure when you see them you'll agree that there's a lot of invention required to kind of make those work. There are even moments where there's a lot of wire work, and the choreography almost feels kind of wuxia. It's very elaborate, it's very mystical, it's very cool. And that's about the gist of it. I don't really know what else I could say about this movie, since there's not really much more to get into with the story or the characters. It's upfront about what it is. It is a stylistic, exciting, fun movie that doesn't try to be something it's not. And if, like me, where plot's not that important to you, I could see you really loving this one. It's full of imaginative and exciting sequences, super interesting characters who are really over the top and exaggerated and brilliant, and a lot of fun. And topped off with great practical blood effects just to keep it exciting. It doesn't take itself too seriously, there's plenty of humour thrown in there through some of the deaths, through some of the characters, and through the way a lot of these events are presented. But it's a fun time, and, hopefully you'll feel the same way I did. Or I wouldn't be doing a very good job recommending movies, would I? But as someone who primarily watches action movies and doesn't really mind if a plot falters if action is good and it's exciting and it's fun, this is a great movie. And I'll be totally honest with you, it never slows down. While some of the flashbacks are a little bit tedious, they don't last very long and they don't happen very often. This is quite literally a boss rush movie. It goes from beat to beat to beat, so quick and so fast that you'll never get bored. And if you're vibing with the action and the style, that's a total treat, because it just means that you're going from scene to scene getting more of what you're enjoying about the movie. I don't see any way how you could be disappointed with this. If you are, well then let me know in the comments and tell me how you feel. But I personally feel like this is a really underrated movie. Even just reading the reviews and looking at the average scores, I feel like this is getting slept on by the kind of people who would really love it. And while I was initially suckered in by potentially watching something really stupid because it was called Psycho Gothic Lolita, I ended up being impressed by getting a really competent stunt and action film at the end of the day. So basically what I'm saying is just don't write off, give it a chance. It's not very long, so what's there to lose? So I hope you like it, I hope you check it out. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you do. That's up to you. It's your life. I'll see you in the next one.